Wouldn't it be crazy if the best Mesa amplifiers weren't even made by Boogie? Well, with the Synergy Syn20IR amplifier and the DRECT and IICP modules, I've gotten some of the best Rectifier and Mark series tones I've ever had in my life. And today we're going to have some fun and explore these modules and explore some really great tones that I've gotten out of these. And let's dive in right away with a demo of the DRECT module. And yeah, let's see if I can conjure some great sort of late 90s, early 2000s nu metal tones out of this module and the Syn20IR. Take a listen. All right, that was great. So that was my Balaguer Espada Limited 2024 into the Syn20IR with the DRECT module loaded in. For the main stuff, so the heavy stuff, I used the top channel, so the red channel on the modern mode. And then for some sections in the verse section, I used the bottom channel. So the bottom channel with the orange mode for a bit more of a nuanced tone. And yeah, I think it sounds absolutely wonderful. For the entirety of this video, the Synergy Syn20IR will be fed into my Grossmann Fatbox 1x12 cabinet loaded with the Celestion V30 and mic'd up with two SM57s and one MD421 Kompakt, blended to taste. Now, a lot of the Synergy modules, including this one, they have these switches over here. It's called like an input bias or cathode something. In any case, it affects the feel and response of the preamplifier. Basically, when you set it all the way to the left, which is how I have it set, the low end is very thick, fat, and loose, which for my rectifier tones, I prefer that sound. It's like really fat and bloated, basically. A little bit too much, but that is something that I've also noticed with my real rectifier amplifiers. That low end is just so fat, and it's a little bit too much, actually, but that's what I love, right? It's scooped, it has the sizzly top end, and the low end is a little bit uncontrolled. But yeah, if you want a more tight and controlled and a bit more of a modern low end, you would set this little switch over here to the right position. So position 3, which is the default setting. And yeah, in terms of the settings, I kind of dialed it in similar to how I would dial in my Mesa rectifiers. The gain at around 2 o'clock, bass lowered a bit, so set to around 11 o'clock or so, mids at around noon, treble to around 2 o'clock, presence to about 2 o'clock as well. The top end is nice and controlled. It does that sizzly thing, but it's not too nasty. Sometimes real rectifiers tend to sound a little bit too raw in that area, and I really like how sort of this module sounds a little bit more polished. But we have to note that this is based on a very early rectifier. I think the Rev D or the Rev C, in any case, a really early revision, and those tend to sound a little bit different than the current models. But yeah, that sounded really good. And then, of course, for the slightly lower gain section in the verse, I just used the bottom row, so the green channel with the orange mode, which is a bit more sort of calm sounding and a bit more vintagey with kind of similar settings, just a little bit more mids here. And that's about it. So yeah, that sounded really good. Now we are going to move on to the 2CP module, which I have loaded in right now. And of course, that's based on a Mesa Boogie Mark II C+, that legendary amplifier that Metallica and Dream Theater used, and so many others. Let's see how it sounds. Take a listen. Alright, that sounded wonderful. Really classic, like that old school Metallica sound. I love it. I used my Schecter E1 Evil Twin with the Fishman Fluence modern pickups in it on the bridge pickup, the ceramic pickup, so nice, tight, and modern. Into the Syn 20IR once again with the structure set to A, just as in the intro track with the DRECT. By the way, I forgot to mention that. And yeah, as I said, this sounds so good. It sounds really like that classic old school thrashy Metallica tone, and I love it so much. In terms of the settings, I'm using the top channel once again, so I guess that's the lead channel. I have the lead drive set to around 130 or so, and then the volume 1 control to around almost to 3 o'clock, which also helps to add more gain. I have the lead shift on, and then the treble pretty high to around 4 o'clock or so, mids to around 9 o'clock or so, bass also to around 9 o'clock or so, because those Fishmans tend to be very tight. So this helps to fill the bottom end out a little bit. With thicker sounding pickups, you might lower this even more to get an even tighter sound. And presence is set to around 11 o'clock or so. And then the 5-band graphical EQ, which of course is a very important aspect of this amplifier and this sound. I have it on, obviously. Scooped the mids down almost all the way. The lower mid and upper mid sliders are at around the middle, and then the bottom end and the top end sliders are set a little bit higher than the middle setting. So it's a nice V, really nice. And yeah, that's it for that sound. Now for the lead sound, I added some delay in post, and I also raised the mids a little bit and changed some of the settings to make the sound a little bit more fat, which of course works better for a lead tone. To have a bit of a contrast between the rhythm tone, which is scooped and sizzly and chunky, and then the lead tone to fill that out quite nicely and to complement each other well. But yeah, I like Mesa rectifiers, I like Mesa Mark amps, but they aren't perfect. First of all, they are quite expensive. I mean, the new reissues are quite expensive, like 3,500 or 4,000 euros or so to get yourself a reissue of the older rectifiers or the older 2C Plus amplifiers, and that's a lot of money. Now, I have 3 rectifier amps. I have the mini rectifier 25, I have the single rectifier and the dual rectifier, the 3-channel one, and I like those. They are cool amplifiers, but they tend to be a little bit out of control in terms of the frequency response. Now, that is of course part of the rectifier charm, but a lot of times you have to kind of struggle with the settings and in the mix to make them fit the mix really well. And I felt like the DRECT model just worked in the mix instantly, basically. Really nice. And yeah, of course, the dual rectifier and also the single rectifier are quite large and unwieldy, and Supposedly they are very hard to do maintenance on as well. And they are also made by Gibson now, and you know, a lot of people are doubting whether they want to support Gibson or not, which I can understand. While this Synergy amplifier over here, the Syn20IR, is much more compact, it's more affordable, it has more features. I mean, it's basically a 3-channel amplifier with a module included, a nice clean channel, and then the channels of the modules combined, that's 3 channels. You can program the foot switch, you have the power amp structures, you have the reactance control, you have the built-in IR loading, you can operate them cabless, they are much more lightweight, much more portable, and you can change them into any amp you like according to the modules that you have. So it's a platform that is really hard to beat, and I'm really in love, basically. I really like these things. I was a little bit skeptical about the Synergy stuff before I tried it, like, how can this platform sound so good? There have to be some shortcomings, right? But when I tried these modules, I was just blown away. So I'm sold. I'm a fan. But anyway, I'm rambling too long here. What I'd like to do now is just grab a guitar and start dialing in the DRECT module, try some of the controls, and just basically show you how I landed on the tone that I landed on for the demo. And I'll show you the settings that I like. Take a look. All right, so we are sitting here with the Synergy Syn20IR and the DRECT module loaded in. Probably my favorite module right now because it sounds so good. It really does that rectifier thing. I'm currently on the red channel, on the red mode as well. We're just gonna dial in some controls and I'm gonna show you how I dialed in this tone. One important thing to note is that this time, as opposed to the intro demo track, what I did is I set the cathode switch to position 3, which is the recommended setting, and it has the most tight low-end response, basically. I mean, it still has that loose and fuzzily low-end response, but it's a bit more tight for sure than setting that switch to the first position, which I did, you know, in the intro of the track for that most fat and loose response, which I do really love about rectifier amplifiers, that they're really imperfect, you know, very raw, thick and loose sounding, and fizzy in the top end as well. I mean, that's that classic rectifier sound after all, right? Before we dial in the controls of the module itself, let's try the different reactance settings and structure settings as well. So I have reactance set to, let's say, a 130 right now. Let me show you how that affects the tone with this particular module. So yeah, for a really in-your-face type sound, you can definitely crank it up a little bit higher, but for me, around there is just fine. It's a good balance. But you can definitely make it sound a little bit more out of control and fizzy, just as a real rectifier, right? But it's also cool that you can get a little bit more control out of this amplifier in terms of that top-end response in comparison to a real rectifier. Okay. Let's try structure B, because now we were on structure A, and let's go to structure B and see how that sounds. It's going to sound a little bit more scooped in the mids and a bit more fizzly up top. Sounds pretty good too, if I'm honest. I like it. It's a little bit more loose as well, so a little bit more saggy and thick in the bottom end. Really nice. If we go to structure C, it's going to darken up the tone a little bit. Let's try that. So to compensate for that darkness, I am going to add a little bit more reactance there. Should sound a little bit more bright now. So for the most tight and modern response, I guess that, you know, structure C is a very good setting. Yeah, I love how it sounds, but I think that structure A for me definitely is the preferred setting here. Let me lower the reactance a little bit to compensate. Yeah, that works for me. Wonderful, just wonderful. So we're going to stick with those reactance settings for now. Now, just for fun, let's try the clean channel just with a simple chord so you can hear how that sounds. Beautiful clean right there. Probably a better clean tone than what you can get on your actual rectifier. All right, so we're on the blue or green channel. I can't really see if it's blue or green, but we're on the orange mode right now. Let me put the EQ to the noon positions, just so you guys can hear how that sounds, including the P control, which is the presence. All right, so this is with all the EQ controls to noon. You know, it's still very rectifier-y sounding. It just has less gain. It's a bit less aggressive. Let me flip over to the red mode, as that's where, you know, the rectifier magic is at for me. So that sounds good, but I like to dial these amps in a little bit differently. Let me raise the presence a touch as well as the treble. Sometimes I go quite far with the treble controls actually on rectifiers. Let me leave the mids up there and then lower the bass a little bit. And let's see how that sounds. You know, that sounds pretty good. So let's move over to the first channel. And again, let me put everything to noon and show you guys how that sounds. And let's also start with the orange mode. It's a cool kind of crunchy tone. I guess if I were to use this for a crunchy tone, I would raise the presence quite a bit as well as the treble and lower the bass a little bit. Let's see how that sounds. Let's add some mids there. I mean, that's still pretty far removed from like a Marshall crunch. So, you know what? We're just going to dial in a good old American rectifier sound. And we're going to switch over to the red mode once again. So what I just basically did was add treble for clarity, put the mids to around noon or so, and lower the bass a little bit. Let's see how that sounds. Of course, if you want a bit of a thicker tone, you can dial up the bass there. Or if it's not scooped enough for you, you can scoop out some of the mids, maybe add a little bit more treble and bass there. And that is very scooped indeed. So let's go back to my preferred settings, which is with the mids at noonish. Lower the bass, you know, because that tightens up the tone. Take a listen to this. But I like some thickness in there. Let's see what we can get away with in terms of the amount of gain. Let's lower the gain. Cool, so you can get some cool crunchy tones out of this as well. Let me crunch it up a little bit more by raising the mids here and lowering the gain even more. Let me add a little bit of bass. Cool. And back once more to my favorite settings. I'm spending way too much time with this module, but it's just way too much fun. I can't help it. Yeah, this definitely probably is my favorite Synergy module for now. The DRECT, it really does that rectifier sound, and I love it a lot. Really nice, so that is the DRECT module. Now let's do the same thing with the IICP module. All right, that is some classic Mark II C+ goodness right there. These settings are almost the same as the settings that I used in the intro track. This is a different guitar. This one is tuned to D as well. This is the Schecter PT Black Ops. Same kind of pickup though, Fishman Fluence Modern Open Core. And right now I have it set to the active voicing. Listen what happens if I set it to the passive voicing. So I'm going to switch back and forth. So the low end thickens up a little bit when I set it to the passive voicing, and the sound becomes a little bit more dynamic. Anyway, so I have those settings based on active pickups, okay? Now if I were to use passive pickups or a passive pickup sound, I would dial the amp in a little bit differently. I'm not going to show you the clean channel this time. The blue or green channel is, yeah, a green in this case, is a little bit unique. I've never really used this channel before. It has less gain than the red channel, and I guess if you were to get a good crunchy tone out of that module with this channel, you'd have to dial in the module quite differently, raise the bass and stuff like that. But we're not going to do that right now. We're going to focus on that high gain tone, and I'm going to basically show you how you can dial that in, okay? First, let's try the different structure settings real quick so you can hear how they affect the tone with this module. I like A once again because it's a good middle ground. Structure B is a bit more fizzly, and structure C is quite modern, great for a more Petrucci-like sound, I guess. But A is nice and gnarly and also tight, and it does the sort of thrashy thing really well. Of course, I'm using the graphical EQ. Listen to what happens when we turn that off. So obviously it's way more honky sounding. So I have a nice old V dialed in there, you know, that classic V, which works really well with Mark type amplifiers, scooping out the mids and adding a little bit of top and bottom, and the low mid and upper mid slider are basically in the middle somewhere. But of course you can go quite extreme with that, as you heard. You can really shape your tone with that. If you're more of a lead player, you'd probably want to bump up the mids a little bit, for example, which is also what I did for the solo section in the intro song. Anyway, so I am on the red channel. I have the lead shift on. Let's see what happens if we turn that off. So this is with it on. Now let's turn it off. It's not bad, but it's a bit more saturated with it on, basically. Now let's see what happens if you're starting out with all the EQ controls at noon. Let's see what happens, because this is quite an interesting amplifier when it comes to how the EQ controls react. So take a listen to this. It's way different, right? Definitely not as, tight and crunchy. So, if you don't know anything about these amplifiers, you might be like, wow, this sounds bad. This is not the sound that I was looking for, especially if you disengage the EQ. Check it out. That's pretty far removed from the tone that we're going for, right? So the key here is, in order to get the tightness, you're going to have to lower the bass. Since I'm using this active pickup guitar, or at least the active pickup setting, I'm not going to lower it all the way, because I do want a little bit of fatness in the lows. More on that in a second. The mid control is quite subtle, but we can lower it to, say, 9 o'clock or so. And then when we add treble, we basically add saturation. Let's take a listen. So yeah, you can add more treble and then you basically add more gain. You can do that with the controls over here as well, the lead drive and the volume 1. But the treble control basically has the same effect. If you want a fatter tone, kind of more like a rectifier, you can just raise the bass a touch. But lower is definitely preferred. Now, if I dial this down all the way, it's going to sound even more tight. And that's going to work well with the passive voicing. Let's try the lead bright switch and see what that does. Yeah, there you go. And of course, if you want a sound with less gain, all you have to do is either lower the volume 1 gain and the lead drive, or both. And that's going to get you a more crunchy sound, basically. And then you can dial it into taste. But of course, we're going for a high gain tone here, so let's crank these controls back up for some thickness. And when I tune down the guitar to drop C, it's going to sound very brutal. Now, if you're a lead player and you want a little bit more juice, so to speak, then we can go to Structure C, dial down the reactance a touch. I haven't touched the presence control, by the way, I'm just realizing this, but I found it to be a little bit subtle. So take a listen what happens if I turn that control. So as you can hear, it's really subtle. Maybe it's only active on the other channel or something. Or when you crank up the gain, it doesn't work, something like that. Anyway, so for a good lead tone, what I'd like to do is I usually would crank the bass up and the mids up a little bit too as well. And then the mid slider, I'm gonna have to be very careful here. Bump that up just a touch because these controls, the sliders on this EQ are very sensitive. And I'll go to the passive voicing. So yeah, you can mess with the controls as much as you like because there's a lot of room for shaping the tone here. I love the 2CP module a lot, and in my opinion, it does the thing. Really cool. So that was the Syn20IR by Synergy with the Mesa Boogie based modules, the DRECT and the 2CP. Again, I'm just blown away by how good they sound and the functionality of this amplifier platform as a whole in combination with the modules. I'm having so much fun here. And yeah, it's only 20 watts and it has EF84s in the power section. Ooh, they can't sound big, right? Well, as you heard, this thing sounds massive, okay? It might not be enough for you if you're used to playing with a very loud drummer or very big stages. But then again, you could also run it directly into the PA, you know, and use the IR section to add some extra level through your monitors. That would work, or you can add a power station by Frayette or something like that to this to add a little bit of volume if you need it. But trust me, this thing is pretty darn loud. And I honestly think, and this really is my opinion, that both the DRECT module and the 2CP do such a great job at emulating those classic Boogie sounds that I think that I actually prefer these sounds over the actual Mesa Boogie amps. So I have the Mark 535 in comparison to the 2CP, which of course is a different Mark revision, but still it's much easier to get that chunky and tight aggressive sound with this module than it is with the actual Boogie. And the same goes for the DRECT. It's just instant rectifier gratification. And I love it so much. I don't know what else to say. I hope you enjoyed this video. I certainly did. If you enjoyed this video, please drop a like and subscribe down below, as that really helps out. Also, let me know in the comments what your thoughts are on the tones that these modules conjured in this video. And if you want to support the channel, you can buy something from Synergy at my affiliate links for Thomann and Sweetwater. That would be great. Or you can buy some IRs at my own web store. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Cheers.